thanks everyone for bearing with us. And we're so glad to have you all here. Andrea, when we first published your first book, 12, we weren't doing these like online readings. And I am sad about that but now I'm happy because we get to hear you read from that book as well as your new book.
Yeah.
And so yeah, we're celebrating your new book.
It's so shiny.
It's I went with like the glossy because I just feel
Yeah.
like I don't know, there's something about it that I liked for your book. But yeah, it comes out on Monday, and at Interstellar Flight Press, we really love speculative poetry. I think we're one of the few SFF presses like regularly publishing speculative poetry and other stuff alongside it. And this is such a cool book. It's so if you guys haven't checked it out yet, the concept is basically that these are found poems from one of Stephen King's works. And I'm a huge found poetry obsessive, and I love anything like found poetry, erasure poetry. And I think that's kind of like how I first found your work, because you were doing like erasure poems of like Trader Joe's.
Yep.
That was my memory of like first finding your work, and I was like, that's awesome. Because I also love like ephemera, like I'll go to I went to like one of the national parks and like had one of their little things and was doing like an erasure poem with it. I just kind of love anything like that. And so it's I'm so glad that we got to publish two of your books, both 12 and Necessary Poisons. And I'm stoked that this one is found poetry, because that's just something I love. And I don't think we haven't done any others, but we do have another one in the works,
That's awesome.
by Gretchen Rockwell. And that one is like found poetry from multiple authors in like SFF.
That's
So
awesome.
it's just cool to see what authors are doing with it, and like kind of how it's being approached in a speculative way. So yeah, I mean, it's such a cool book. There's these really cool illustrations in it. Like I'm such a nerd. This is another thing I'm obsessed with, is these are these are illustrations from the public domain, right,
Mhm.
Andrea? Yeah, so
They're collage, yeah.
yeah, they're kind of a mixture. Like you can kind of see that one's like these found yeah. So they're like nature art, but also weird, creepy horror. And I love it. That's something that also is I'm into. Our One of our other books, The Field Guide to Invasive Species of Minnesota, we
Mm.
did found kind of art like that from public domain. And so we had actual pictures of the invasive species. And so yeah, it really made sense in our catalog of works to get to work on your book. So I'm very very excited and glad that we get to hear them read out loud today also. So that's my introduction. It was just squeeing. So I'm gonna like let you read, and then I'll come back and we can talk about stuff. So
Okay, great. And before I forget, I just want to say thank you so much to Interstellar Flight Press for publishing both the books, because this is an amazing press to work with, and I'm just so grateful. You guys have done a wonderful job of putting my work into print, and I'm really
thank
happy
you.
with it.
We love you too.
Starting with Necessary Poisons, I'm reading off a PDF. So the first poem is this narrative. I said, I'm a genuine person, a burst of being. The letters have stabbed me with the blunt end of a narrative, the pencils jammed into my red. If you want, I can be a genial man, a genuine dildo, a mafioso, a Neanderthal, something or other impossible to forget. I said, I have drunk the obvious poison. I have made, I have been made a leaky craft, piloting into the gales, too close to the edge of the calm. I said, I have a voice like a shotgun. remember, I may explode if provoked. My grin is loaded with munitions. Just press the button. The book. I could be possessed by words, an evocation written on skin. Imagine me a compendium of cant and wit, a bundle of assurances and prejudices. I felt you read me, scouring the borders of my skin for answers, for unforeseen solutions. But never mind. You could not imagine the completed manuscript. No one could. Even I don't know what I mean. Making arrangements. The dead are a dream of family and decomposed time. They carry their ashes and bones, their rolled up days, their chances to say goodbye. They decline to name their corpse a house. They exist in movement and tears. The dead are foremen of the designated mortuary. They are always crafty, trying first the burial and then the furnace. The dead are uncomplaining. Their hurt and pain engraved in gold and implanted in the shady room. Not one unpleasant feeling escapes. The dead are a grudge that declines to rest. They are always behind enemy lines, but are still and will not attack. They are full of transmissions that infiltrate the brain. The objective, to be believed. The dead are not remarkable. They flower up from the iron ground, a single dark plant, a common source of leaves. The dead have no answers. They write little marks, which easily burn. See them flaming up in. The next one is a little ghost. Fate is risky, all set up and thin chances. Scales balance, people die. The universe doesn't invite returns. But there you are, your face blurry and bright, material enough to be moderately dangerous. Smoking and bloody, you rattle in creaky houses, invite the possibility of concurrence. You expected a psychic event, infestations and delusions, or at least a little misapprehension. But everyone is quite even-tempered. One can only go so far to remember you after all but forgotten. These severe black flowers, murders marking the night, that bloody garden of victims. I think of unpleasant, swampy things, picking over paranoias like fruit. The jackal reaches for the subject, his eyes yellowish. Pages escape his bloody lip, building an infinite list of who would have died, who never began. I wandered the park of the damned, the ones who unfurl like leaves, sagging with ill luck. All of this soft unease watered and thickened in the soil. The jackal disappeared, his gleeful eyes eroding in gales of mist. Glad to see him go, I move hauntedly, looking for some demonstration of austerity until the day straightened, clipping off blunt hope like an obsolete stem. I'm going to read a couple from here. 12 is a collection based on the Brother Grimm's fairy tale, The 12 Dancing Princesses. And so each poem is a mini vignette of what happened to that particular sister after the events of the fairy tale. The first sister. The white of her wedding dress evoked not innocence, but the heat of her rage. Her husband, old soldier, trickster, liar, sweated under her incandescence. His hands blistered as he took her arm and steered her in procession down the aisle. He chose her because she was the eldest, because the weight of history was braided in her brown hair and piled on her head, just as his sins were written in the scars mapping his body. As the soldier and his prize stared at each other across the marriage bed, he felt distant battlefields in his bones. I won't take anything you are not ready to give, he said, keeping his distance, patient. Her blood spit within her veins like dragon fire. In reply, she ravaged him, raking his bare skin with clawed fingers, biting until she drew blood, taking every ounce of pleasure from him as she had once taken from the dancing. She dreamed herself poisonous and woke the whole in the morning to fresh resolution. Gathering herbals from a sister's garden, she brewed belladonna tea, steeped mushrooms in aconite, and baked hemlock-seasoned lark into a meat pie. Her husband thanked her for her generosity and tipped his teacup into a vase of dahlias, declared an aversion to mushrooms, and declined the pie, his stomach overfull for anything so rich. She tossed foxglove leaves into salads, cooked creamy mandrake au gratin, and slipped cyanide into his wine. The soldier picked his way through the greens, knocked the au gratin clumsily to the floor, raised his goblet high to his wife's health, drank deep, and did not die, having already switched one cup for another. They played a game of poisoning, death always at the edges of every smile, every kiss and touch and caress. One of these days, you're going to succeed in poisoning me, he said. Voice graveled as he rasped his bristled chin against the softness of her throat and scoured her bare hip bones with war-weathered hands. And then won't you just regret? Such, she said between gaps of breath, such regret. I like all the sisters. It's always hard to decide which ones to read. Ooh, I like this one a lot. The 8th and 9th sisters. By the time the household discovered the hoard hidden away in the twins' chambers, the silver candlesticks, gold brocade, casks of wine, strands of pearls, individual earrings, porcelain dolls, embroidered pillows, broken lockets, brass keys, crystal vases, books of psalms, tin soldiers, cracked looking glasses, and purses filled with coins, autumn leaves, and stones, all stuffed under beds, piled behind the curtains, and overflowing the cabinets like a dragon's hoard. The twins themselves had already absconded. The brown locks of their shorn hair discarded upon their trove as though this too was treasure. It was said a countess was robbed upon the road to the castle, one hand plucking the jeweled pendant from her neck, the other slitting her throat, both laughing as the blood adorned the fine dress of the countess like rubies. Thus the Black Fox was born, myth, legend, murderer, hero. It was said the Black Fox was a master thief. No, it was said the Black Fox was an entire company of bandits. The Black Fox could steal anything, jewels hidden inside castle keeps, entire towers full of gold, or the tower itself, kisses and secrets and lives. The Black Fox could become invisible, could travel leagues within a single step. The Black Fox was hypnotically handsome and could seduce amiable ladies and young lords alike. The Black Fox kept such a trove of stolen treasure he could buy an entire kingdom. The Black Fox was a savior of the poor and the meek. The Black Fox was a devil, a trickster god. The Black Fox was just a clever man of flesh and blood. The Black Fox was the child of death itself. No one ever said the Black Fox was a pair of twin sisters bearing shorn hair, leather breeches, and a set of short swords. No one ever said two girls could no one's ever said two girls could carve open the world like an oyster, taking all its pearls and swallowing the meat. No one ever believed two girls could take and take and take for no other reason than they knew they could. But their sisters knew. They felt the selfsame hunger within their bones, and so they said nothing. The black fox, in the end, was immortal. Stories of his ongoing adventures never dying. Decades later, long after one sister died from a stabbing in a drunken brawl, and the other was hanged in a town square, people still clustered in the dim corners of inns, whispered the name and shuddered. Maybe one more from this collection, and then I'll read it, switch back to the other one for a little bit. The 10th Sister. Princesses were not made for kitchens, but the yeasty, warm scent of bread baking drew her down into the heat, where the head cook huffed at her presence, irritated, and would not let her touch the spoons or bowls or cupboards or rollers, ushering her to the side where her silk skirts would gather no stains and her hands would remain clean and soft. She stood in her corner and watched the cook's work. Floured hands, kneading dough, forming rolls and baguettes, shaping sweetmeat pies and cookies and cakes. The assemblage of cooks laughed and sang as they worked. They gossiped when they forgot the princess was there. One young cook in particular, about her own age, had a belly-deep laugh that made the princess smile. The cook was not as neat as the others, tucking loose strands of hair behind her ear with jam-sticky fingers, wiping her sweaty brow with the back of her wrist and trailing a line of flour across her forehead. Sometimes the young cook would bring the princess treats fresh from the oven, a still hot macaroon or steaming slice of pie that burned the roof of the princess's mouth, but she accepted the scalding in exchange for the honey of the girl's smile. How do you do it? The princess asked. Let me show you, answered the cook, and tugged her down to the tables and cutting boards, to the stoves and ovens. The cook guided the hands of the princess, leading them in the sifting of flour, cracking of eggs, mixing of ingredients, and filling of molds. She taught her all the recipes she knew by heart and showed her the rest kept in the large book she revered. They consumed one another in whispers and glances, dough gummy fingers twisting together, arms grazing as they passed between counters and ovens. At night, they untangled the laces of their skirts, uncaged themselves of corsets, peeling each other open like rare fruit. They licked the sweetness from each other's flesh, a secret joy discovered on the tips of their tongues. Princesses were not made for kitchens or cooks, but it didn't matter. They spent days in the heat of the kitchen and nights in the heat of each other. Their love, their love tasted like salt and sugar, like sweet pastry and bread pudding. It wouldn't last. Nothing ever did. Pastries grew hard, bread bloomed mold. You savored it while it was fresh, or it would grow stale. And that's from 12. And I'll put that aside. And I'll read a few more from from Necessary Poisons to kind of wrap things up. This unforeseen country. I asked how the garden escaped this late winter, the unlikely flowers white and palpable. You whispered a word, proffered secrets. I have not asked why, just allowed the fault to be breached. You shifted like water, smoke, or breath. You lost surface tension. I regarded the answers and imagined borders. I thought the empty world is not an engine, but a cradle, filled with small trembling things like us. Um, the zenith. I ghosted society and ended up impersonating a dead dog. I invited chatty cockroaches and hectoring wasps. It was a lesser doom, I assure you. Have I not a right to be so blithely veiled and deadened? No one understands my gonzo position. They doubt the merit. But knowing me as you do, you don't ask why, only laugh and send a bouquet of flowers. Sudden botany. I explained my box of earth, how I made myself into taboo ground, growing dark columbine, Virginia creeper, poison ivy. You were ever so polite. When you touched me, we felt the clearly marked borders between bodies and opened an invisible world of ungovernable feeling. The question, am I explicable? Never mind the encyclopedias, empiric data, or other bullshit. Never mind the foreboding. Everything is perfectly subjective. We face the moon, spring rises. You overturned my soil, handled my broad dark leaves and tendrils. My growth was extraordinary, and I produced a cold little flower. The question, does it smell sweet? As a botanist, you must know I am carnivorous. You must know you are not immune to my unfurling, my rising teeth. Given the chance, I will prey upon the fly, the spider, you. Student of more. 1. There will be black magic, spells, forces of the ether. 2. The tales are mine, ones made up and warmed for tomorrow. This is not all. I am flying, happy. 3. Covens, 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 curdling cool connection on the cusp of control. 4. I am growing in a greenhouse, and with the plants, fresh herbs, and flower infestations in the greenhouse. 5. In many ways, the Black arts are fictional, but true. And I think I will end it there.
Awesome. Um, so one of the things I was thinking about as you were reading was how the poems in Necessary Poisons all go so well together. Like as you're reading them, I'm like, they could just be like a sequence almost. And like maybe it's because of the nature of like what they came from. Um, but yeah, so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about like how you came up with this sort of narrative out of the found text.
Um, I certainly wasn't thinking of it as a collection when I started. It started as a 30-day poetry challenge. The poeming from 2016, where I think it was about 50 poets were each assigned one book by Stephen King and were created a found poetry poem every day for the month of, no, I don't remember the month offhand, but it was it was for a whole month, and we each created a poem. So during the course of that, I was partly in survival mode in terms of like just one new poem, one new poem, one new poem. It doesn't matter if they connect, it's just coming through with the poetry. Um, and I was really just leaning into the process of playing with language, and like starting a poem would involve like searching for a word and finding words that like were interesting to me, and then seeing what happens when you combine certain words together and then start to build off of that kind of experience. And a lot of the words, because this particular book called The Plant, which is an unfinished epistolary novel that Stephen King did as his own experiment, and is available for free online for whoever wants to read it. Um, the text was so focused on plants and greenery and there because of Stephen King, also blood and mayhem and violence and chaos and that kind of stuff. So because the text had an existing set of structure and words, like I was drawn to certain words that kind of over time. And sometimes I would pull a poem, like each poem is usually like 1 to 2 pages of text that I pulled from, and sometimes those would overlap. So I'd have some of the same words coming into 2 separate poems, um, creating an inherent connection just from the poetry. And as the kind of poems were coming together, I kept trying to like, I felt like I had something in terms of a book there, but like I wasn't fully sure yet. And so like you start kind of putting it side by side. I had submitted it a couple of different times in other forms. Um, and and there was some pieces missing to it. So it involved after those 30 days starting to like look for the connections in what I had already written and like build on those connections with some new pieces and further explore what already naturally came out of the piece and infill with stuff that kind of helps it feel more, even more connected together.
Yeah, it's interesting that Stephen King's book was an experiment in like self-publishing, and it made me think of like the Brandon Sanderson like Kickstarter, like like these big name authors always like kind of playing with like, what if I self-published, and so it's just funny. And I think that one of the things I love about the book is how you use the language of like Stephen King and sort of like push back at it. Like all of your work has a feminist thread. And I think a lot of times just inherently by like the nature of writing feminist work and then writing with an author who is very much like sometimes on the opposite side of that in ways is really interesting to me. Feel free, guys, if any of you attendees have questions to drop them in the chat or raise a hand and we'll ask your questions also. But yeah, and then so and it's funny too because the book is so different than 12. Like 12 is like very much a sequence and like has this narrative of like the sisters in this fairy tale that you were working from. So it's cool to see that.
Yeah.
Can you talk about like the illustrations a little bit?
Oh yeah, that was fun. When I started visualizing it as a chapbook coming together, and I was just like, I don't, I think that, okay, hold on. Let me think about this for a second. So the illustrations idea kind of came late, and it was because a friend of mine named Rose Eaton was doing digital collage. And normally I collage and paper and stuff like that. There's a lot of limitations with that. You can't resize things very easily. You'd have to figure out how to print them out in a new format, that kind of stuff. Um, so I love collage, but like it could be very laborious in a very specific way. And so my friend Rose introduced me to digital collage, and it sort of made my head explode. I was like, why didn't I ever think of this before? I could have been doing this for ages, kind of thing. So it really just kind of started with me messing around. And the one of the first things I made was the image of the rib cage with the plants coming through the rib cage. That was the first piece that I made. And I was looking at this thing, this collage, and I was like, wait a minute, like these poems that I had written are very like they're very plant greenery and plant based. But they're also like body and identity based. And it seemed a natural connection. And I was like, what if I could like create sections, using collage kind of thing instead of having like a number. So like each section is like the rib cage or the heart or the eye or whatever, the different versions of it. kind of build that natural thematic separation kind of thing, but through visuals instead of through a section title or a number or that kind of thing. And so then I just started thinking about what other physicality would I want to embody, and that's where like the heart came into play, the eye, and I'm blanking on what the last one is, but that's okay. And so I got into the digital claws because I was like, oh, it's less laborious. It's not as much less laborious as I thought it was. Every leaf I have to go through and meticulously erase the background around every single leaf gap space so that like I can have that empty background so that I can layer more easily on top of each other and mess around with it. It presented new challenges, which is fun. It's always fun to find new ways to stretch yourself. So yeah.
That's awesome. I think it's funny too because our books, my book, The Smallest of Bones, also has like a kind of like body section. And I was like, maybe I subconsciously, like I hadn't put that quite together entirely, but like, we are obsessions. So Lisa asks, can you talk about the different ways you approach writing like erasure poetry and found
Mhm.
poetry versus like just non-erasure poetry?
Yeah. So when I'm just kind of approaching like a non-erasure poem, just trying to write, a lot of times it can be very like if I have a concept, if I have a line, if I have an image in my set head, something I can build off of, then I can kind of find my way into a flow. Voice is very important to me in terms of finding that very specific voice. Like in 12, it was like it was that fairy tale narration style that gives that feeling of, folk storytelling that I was wanting to evoke with the voice with that. In other poems, it's a specific tone or flow or something. And if I can find that, then I can find my way into the poem, or fiction too. It's the same thing. Like if I don't have the tone of voice, the I get lost very quickly, and I spend a lot of time rewriting and rewriting and rewriting until I can figure out what that is. And then I can kind of get to the heart of what I'm trying to evoke emotionally, narratively, that kind of stuff, as I'm building out the poem or story from there. Um, Erasure poetry is so much different in terms of how I approach it structurally, because when you're writing a non-erasure poem, like you have this full text of words. Sometimes that can be too much, like you have infinity in front of you and it's overwhelming and you don't know how to approach it. You're also I tend to approach things from a structural sense, like here's I need to get from this beginning of the poem to the end of this poem. I need to get my character from France to Germany, and how am I going to structurally figure out how to get them there, that kind of stuff. With erasure, it feels more like a puzzle, more like collage. You're getting into this very tight focus, or at least that's where I start, is like this tight focus on the language itself. So like I was saying with necessary poisons, I'll skim through a page and circle words that catch my brain, that scratch an itch in my brain. Manifestations, infestations, bloody, ivy, like just words that kind of start scratching an itch, they sound interesting, they have a vibe to them. There's just something about them grabs my attention. And then with this particular one, I would print out the page, I would have all these circle words, and then I would literally just start drawing lines. So I would be like, okay, the plant and then loop around, and I would have this like webby mess of lines on the page connecting words to each other, um, forming the puzzle of this poem out of those words. And then transcribe it into like a Word doc so that I could see, is there something really here? Is the flow working the way I think it is in my head? And sometimes involves, I'm there and I'm like, but I'm kind of missing a word. So then I'm literally searching word by word, like, what can I use? I need an adjective that feels like the tone of what I'm trying to create here. Sometimes it's even like, I literally need the word she. I just need the word she, and it's not on the page. So with this particular one, I could flip to the next page and kind of be like, okay, it's there, that kind of thing, and piece them together in that way. Different found poetry projects have a different way of approaching them depending on what the piece is. Like blackout poetry, it's because you're moving linearly, usually down the page kind of thing. It's a different vibe entirely from that kind of what I did with Necessary Poisons, but they all start with that linguistic specificity that is really important to me. So
I'm always struggling to find a verb. I'm like, can I just have a verb? I need a verb. Yeah. Like,
or tenses, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
I need an ing verb, but it's a regular, like, how much leeway do I give myself as a poet to, like, the words in there, it's just in the wrong tense. And I did
Yeah.
do that with one of the poems where I was like, I just made a note of it at the end today, and I was like, look,
That's
I'm
fine.
changing the tenses.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, it's just, that's the truth, is like the tense sometimes is just like not where it should be. But yeah, it's funny. Really good question. I'm curious how you feel about Stephen King's books, and like how, if you were like a fan before this, or like what's your personal history?
So I was a mega fan in high school. Mega fan. I don't remember which book I read first, but I in my high school years and into my college years, I read through probably 30 of his books, if not more, probably more. But just like I was grabbing every single one that I could. And I'm still a huge fan of like The Dark Tower. I definitely like, I'll go back and kind of, haven't done it in a while, but every once in a while I'll be like, I'm gonna read that one, or um whatever. And it's definitely like approaching it from with a bit more critical eye as an adult than I did as a teenager, because as a teenager I was just like, give me kind of thing. Like uh he was my favorite author for a long time during that time period. Yeah, and it's just there's definitely like, you kind of look back and it's like, okay, his portrayal of women is not always great, kind of thing. Um uh his portrayal of like minorities in general has a bunch of different problematic, especially in his early works, that kind of thing. Um but at the same time, like there's some incredible aspects of that. Like what I like, what I still like today is that even though that there's aspects of his work that I don't necessarily love nowadays. Like there's definitely a sense of nostalgia to it. I think if I read Stephen King for the first time today, maybe I'd have a completely different perspective. But like looking back at something like Carrie, there he's writing about a teenage girl. His perception about how teenage girls behave is not necessarily accurate, all of that kind of stuff. Um, but also like there is extreme bullying that happens. There's some terrible things that happen to fellow teenagers. There are abusive parents who exist in the world. There's enough like layers to it that like I can totally see why people revere that character even today. At the same time, like, yeah, it's not perfect. There's problems with it and that kind of stuff. And with a lot of his stories, there's that kind of thing. But mm, there's enough interesting things that he's doing beyond the problematic stuff or in addition to that kind of thing that like, you know, I do find his work, and I'm speaking specifically about his older work, very interesting. I haven't read much or anything of his that's been new in the last 20 years. So
If I can, I would suggest Fairy Tale if you
okay.
haven't read that because you like fairy tales. I
I
know you do.
do.
And it's a really good, I thought it was really good.
Mhm.
It's still a little problematic. Not gonna lie. Like there's still some like, I don't want to like give it away for you, but
Yeah.
you'll get it when you get to it and you'll be like, oh, that's what Holly was talking about.
Yeah.
But it's still I thought it was a worthwhile read.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. I had like a similar kind of feeling about Stephen King. Like I loved Stephen King when I was younger, and then kind of like have been looking around at people pushing back at his work. Like it's
Mhm.
cool that we can like have that conversation. And I agree, like it's like complicated. It's like you look back and you're like, that is kind of problematic,
Mhm.
but I also kind of like it,
Yeah.
and you're like, is it hyperbole or is it, yeah, like he took some things and experiences that I feel like he extrapolated them further than reality. But,
Mhm.
um, but yeah, I still kind of love it. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's
It's
challenging.
it's hard because he's a good enough storyteller that there's enough compelling there that like you're just like, oh, but I do like it kind of thing.
Yeah. That's the nature, I think, of any work that you look back and think like,
Yeah.
this is problematic, but I still kind of love it. But
Yeah.
maybe I'm
Yeah.
trash. I don't know.
Like
Yeah.
one of the things I've been thinking about uh recently is I had just recently rewatched Carrie for some reason and like the hyper religious women in his texts
Yeah.
who are like taking religion to the extreme, and you don't really often see the same in the male religious figures in his text. Some of those tend to be heroes, like in Salem's
Mm,
Lot kind of situation.
yeah.
But you also have women who God, I can't remember her name, but Mother something in The Stand, who is a woman who is religious, but she's also like a saintly figure and falls into like the magical Negro stereotype too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like there's interesting like I'm like I don't know what I think about that and but it makes me want to like examine it and explore it, and I find that aspect interesting, the exploration of these works where I'm like what is it about this character that like I have issue with, and why do I have issue with it? And how does it compare to other characters and that he's written, and that sort of thing I find really interesting.
Yeah. I think that's that is like that's why you should buy this book. Because no, because I think poetry is one of those ways we can engage with a work. Like we've had this conversation about, like kind of satirizing, but like in a different way, like how
Mhm.
found poetry and erasure poetry specifically have this ability to like comment on something without saying the thing explicitly. Like
Yeah.
it's just like I am just pointing out the language, right? Like the language that pops up over and over again. But the language itself has meaning, and the poem that like the new poem that you write, the found poem,
Mhm.
it points that out to the reader, but it's not saying judgment. It's not, I'm not putting judgment on that language. It's just saying,
Mhm.
look at this language. It exists. What do we think about it? And that's why I really love like found poetry and erasure poetry. I just think they have that ability in a way that other poems maybe don't have that. So
Yeah, it's inherently in conversation or communication with the original text that you're working with, whatever it is.
Yeah,
And sometimes that's like, I've seen collections where that's a little more collaborative, like the person was clearly like is trying to honor the original work.
sure.
There's stuff like this where I'm playing with the language to kind of see what I can come through that's differently in conversation with what he wrote. And then there's stuff like Isabella Hare's All This Could Be Yours, which is an absolutely beautiful, gorgeous, rage-filled like attack on the original text in such a powerful way. Um, which I highly recommend that book and her follow-up book, Erase the Patriarchy, which is where she
That's a great
invited,
title.
yeah,
I
the
love it.
second one was an anthology. So she invited writers to partake in what she had done with her book. So
I gotta get a copy of that. It's my vibe. That's awesome. Anyway, we're nearing kind of the end of our hour here, but thank you so much for reading, and thank you everyone for coming and listening to us chat and listening to the reading. It's always so lovely to have people coming. Our next Zoom for Interstellar Flight Press will be for Stuart Baker's short story collection in early November. And that one is really great. It's a long collection of kind of all of Stuart's selected short stories, and it was really cool to put together. And yeah, so we try to do these for all of our books, and I'm so glad we got to come back around to yours, to your work. And as always, lovely getting to work with you and getting to see everyone. And thanks for coming. And please buy the book. And if you like it, leave a review, at all the review places. That always really helps us, and we appreciate that. And yes, I think
yeah.
that's everything. Do you
Thank
want to
you
say
so
anything
much.
else?
Yeah, just I'm grateful to everybody that came. I love seeing familiar faces too, so that's really nice. And
Awesome.
yeah, thank you. I'm excited. I'm excited to see people hold it in their hands like you're doing.
Yes, we will be at World Fantasy Convention
Yeah.
in about 2 weeks. Oh, and it's coming in Niagara Falls. So if anyone's going, we'll be there, and we will have copies of the book, and Andrea is going to sign them. So if you want to get a signed copy, you can grab one there. Yeah, so come see us. We would love that. But yeah, thanks everyone. I'm gonna close us out for tonight.